All right, everyone. Much of the U.S. government at the moment wants people to be heavily censored and not have free speech. And it's interesting now because the president of Mexico and the leading coalition in Poland are the ones coming out ahead of it in favor of free speech, while you've got places like Canada and most of the U.S. political establishment saying we need less free speech. And I think part of it is because, like in Mexico, you've had a history of oppression on a level that never existed in the U.S. and Canada, at least in the same form. And Poland, certainly, having been behind the Iron Curtain, previously occupied by Nazis, previously occupied by a bunch of other various kingdoms and feudal serfdoms, knows what oppression is about, to the point where that area in the world, because it's right between Russia and Germany, not a good place to be, has been basically bombarded over and over for the last 1,000 years. I stand, therefore, ironically enough, with Poland and the president of Mexico. Now, Poland is taking legal action. They're attempting to create a framework that they want to export EU-wide to protect free speech. It's not a perfect option because it still includes some state control. However, it would be closer to the U.S. system a la pre-2016 than certainly what we have. And we're seeing three basic models of the internet emerge, or I should say tech in general, because China's not part of the internet at large as its own intranet. The Chinese model is where you openly applaud censorship. There's no pretense. There's no facade of free speech because the whole concept is foreign, is alien. The idea is that speech should be explicitly controlled, and then unless it sort of vibes with the party line, whatever it happens to be year to year, then it's unacceptable. It is considered noble for the state to directly intrude into people's communication with the idea that anything outside of the orthodox is dangerous. The U.S. model initially was one of virtually unbridled free speech. Essentially, the idea was if you're not fomenting explicit violence or copyright infringement or defaming someone or something or putting illegal porn up, you should be able to do whatever you want. The American model has morphed, though, into a model where corporations are the main censor. So multi-billionaires, essentially. The state takes a backseat due to the Constitution. The European model, the state overruled the tech firms, which is difficult because, of course, most of the major ones are in the U.S. anyway, and therefore the jurisdiction is different. And the EU basically just tries to cajole these firms in the U.S. By saying, scrub the material or we'll block you, essentially. They can't do anything else. They can't force them to pay a fine, but if they don't pay the fines willingly, they can get blocked in a country or in multiple countries. Unfortunately, all three of the current iterations of the internet fall woefully short of what we need. What we need is a system like the old system, without censorship. Corporations should not be operating in vertical monopolies. Not even just for ethical reasons related to free speech and expression, but because of economic reasons. If they participate in that behavior, they're precluding potentially startups and independent creators and voices that could be more efficient, and therefore create more moolah. It's crippling the U.S. tech world. Well, the alt tech and so forth is not entirely based in the U.S. Right now, the biggest of them, of the alternatives, is BitChute. It's a UK firm. The dude who runs it is based in Thailand. It's not a U.S. firm. It's very, very interesting, and it's also not subject to EU authority, the UK. We could see a fourth model, a British model, spring up. Maybe it'll be better. What we need is more countries to condemn what's going on. In the case of Mexico, it's a condemnation largely about Trump being banned. By extension, though, the idea of censorship by corporations at large is not accepted in most parts of the world. The only problem is that in most cases, instead you have state regulation. The problem is with creating state regulation over a system, the state changes over time. Once you get to the point where you say it's okay for the state to provide limitations on speech outside of the context of reasonable law, which is what I would say the U.S. system by and large at least was in the past, you're creating a legal precedent. The problem is you can then have a totalitarian government, or one at least more authoritarian than you've got, expand that definition. It might be a leftist movement. It might be far right. What if far righters take over one of these countries and weaponize that same apparatus and say, you know what, we don't want any criticism of Jesus. We've already got countries in which criticizing Muhammad is basically illegal, despite the fact that the dude died over 1,000 years ago. Well, it's a small step to saying, well, I mean, you criticize the Pope. You're not allowed to criticize religion. We're having blasphemy laws. You still have them. I think, oddly enough, Poland is one of the nations that has some vestiges of these things, too. there should be no restrictions on speech that doesn't directly cause harm, and saying, well, it offended someone, that's not causing harm. Now, in the UK and in the US and a few other countries, the court systems have agreed upon this. Here's what I want. And it's not just because I'm an American. I want US hegemony over the internet, and I want the state to get out of the way and also get the corporations out of the way so that it's unbridled. Have true free speech. The US internet, even if it's fine, even if the EU bitches and starts blocking things, their websites will never be able to compete simply because the US websites will be so much more tolerant of views. Let them prosecute their own citizens under their own laws, but as far as being punished by the US firms themselves, it shouldn't happen. Shouldn't be necessary. So yeah, good for Poland and Mexico, a couple states that actually still have leaders that have some balls. The United States doesn't. Trump has come out against censorship, but you got to understand he's kind of powerless to do much about it. But most of the political establishment in the U.S. is cut. Most of them want laws against hate speech, despite the fact that the Supreme Court has already ruled that speech is explicitly legal, and that definition by and large doesn't have any legal relevance. Well, they don't care about that. At this point, we've gotten to the point where the political establishment just completely ignores legal and conceptual reality and substitutes whatever it wants in its stead. And as long as it has the MSM parroting the same propaganda over and over again, like a wall of text, people will accept it. Right now, they're accepting the great lie that Trump fomented an insurrection. It never actually happened. That's about all. Peace out.